Hello, good. Welcome to AP Psychology, Chapter 12, Motivation and Work. We're going to start talking about motivation and work, which is Chapter 12. We're going to talk about the perspectives on motivation, instincts on evolutionary psychology, drives and incentives, optimum arousal, and hierarchy of motivations. We'll also talk about hunger, the physiology of hunger, the psychology of hunger, and then we'll talk about sexual motivation, the physiology of sex, the psychology of sex, sexual motivation, adolescent sexuality, sexual orientation, sex and human values, and the need to belong. Then we'll talk about personal psychology, organizing psychology, and motivating achievement. Motivation is a need or desire that energizes and directs behavior. The early view that instincts control behavior has been replaced by evolutionary theory, which searches for adaptive functions of behavior. Drive reduction theory maintains the physiology needs to create psychological drives that seek to restore our internal stability or homeostasis. In addition, some motivated behaviors increase arousal, and we are pulled by external incentives. According to Maslow, some motives are more compelling than others. Hunger seems to originate from changes in glucose level and insulin levels. They are monitored by the hypothalamus, as well as changes in the levels of leptin, orexin, and PYY. To control weight, the body also adjusts its basal metabolic rate. Body chemistry and environmental factors together influence our taste preferences. Psychological influences on eating behaviors are most evident in those who are motivated to be abnormally thin. Like hunger, sexual motivation depends on interplay of internal and external stimuli. In non-human animals, hormones help stimulate sexual activity. In humans, they influence sexual behavior more loosely. One's sexual orientation seems neither willfully chosen nor willfully changed. New research links sexual orientation to biological factors. The need to belong is a major influence in motivating human behavior. Social bonds boosted by our ancestors' survival rates, we experience our need to belong when feeling the gloom and loneliness of or joy of love, and when seeking social acceptance. Work meets several human needs. The growing field of industrial organization psychology attempts to match people to work and enhance employee satisfaction and productivity, and explore strategies for effective workplace management. People who excel are often self-disciplined individuals with strong achievement motivation. Effective leaders build on strengths, work with them to set specific challenging goals, and adapt their leadership style to the situation. So motivation is a need or desire that energizes behavior and directs it towards a goal. This is a picture of Alan Ralston, who was motivated to cut his arm off in order to free himself from a rock that pinned him down, as was made into a feature-length film. Our perspectives on motivation. There are 4 perspectives to explain motivation, include the following: instinct theory, drive reduction theory, arousal theory, and hierarchy of motives. A motivation is a need or desire that serves to energize behavior and to direct it toward a goal. The perspectives useful for studying motivated behavior include instinct theory, now replaced by evolutionary theory, drive reduction theory, which emphasizes the interaction between internal pushes and external pulls, arousal theory, which highlights the urge for optimal level of stimulation, and Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which describes how some motives are, if unsatisfied, more basic and compelling than others. Under Darwin's influence, early theorists viewed behavior as being controlled by instincts, complex behaviors that are rigidly patterned throughout species are unlearned when it became clear that people were naming, not explaining various behaviors by calling them instincts. This approach fell into disfavor. The idea that genes predispose species typical behavior is still influential in evolutionary psychology. This perspective searches for adaptive functions of behavior. Instincts are complex behaviors that have fixed patterns throughout different species and are not learned. The nesting instinct comes into effect with where women builds different kinds of houses. The birds only build one kind of nest. The nesting influence for women, typically, you'll see that when they first become married or when they first become pregnant. Drive reduction theory is when the instinct theory motivation failed. It was replaced by drive reduction theory. A physiological need creates an aroused tension of state, a drive that motivates an organism to satisfy the need. So drive reduction theory proposes that most physiological needs create an aroused psychological states that drive us to reduce or satisfy those needs. The aim of drive reduction is internal stability or homeostasis. Furthermore, we are not only pushed by internal drives, but we are also pulled by external incentives. When there is both a need, hunger, and an incentive, the smell of baking bread, we feel strongly driven. So rather than reducing physiological need or minimizing tension, some motivated behaviors increase arousal. Curiosity-driven behaviors, for example, suggest that too little or too much stimulation can motivate people to seek optimum level of arousal. The physiological aim of drive reduction is homeostasis, the maintenance of steady internal state. This is a key concept. Please remember this. Incentive is where our needs pull incentives positive or negative stimuli and pull us to reducing our drives. A food-deprived person who smells baking bread feels a strong hunger drive. So now we're going to discuss the contribution of arousal theory to the study of motivation. Rather than reducing a physiological need or minimizing tension, some motivated behaviors increase arousal. Curiosity-driven behaviors, for example, suggest that too little or too much stimulation can motivate people to seek optimum levels of arousal. So human motivation aims to seek optimum levels of arousal, not eliminate it. As you can see in the picture, young monkeys and children are known to explore the environment in the absence of a need-based drive. Now we're going to talk about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Abraham Maslow suggested that certain needs have priority over others. Physiological needs like breathing, thirst, and hunger come before psychological needs such as achievement, self-esteem, and the need for recognition. Maslow's hierarchy of needs expressed the idea that until satisfied, some motives are for food, water, and shelter. Only if these are met are we prompted to meet our need for safety and then to meet uniquely human needs to give and receive love, to belong and to be accepted, and to enjoy self-esteem. Beyond this, Maslow lies the highest needs to self-actualize one's full potential. Maslow himself recognized that while the order holds for most people, there are exceptions. Martyrs, for example, sacrifice life itself for an ideal. For some people, the need for respect must be satisfied before they can enter into a love relationship. Maslow also recognized that given motive did not have to be a full 100% satisfied before we turn to a higher need. Our needs, Maslow said, are only partially satisfied at any given moment. He estimated that for the average American, 85% of physiological needs, 70% of safety needs, and 50% of belongingness and love needs, 40% of self-esteem needs, and 10% of self-actualization needs are satisfied. Still, it makes sense that how well lower needs are met determines how much those needs influence our behavior. Maslow noted that the means of satisfying a particular need varied across cultures. In our society, a person may win respect from others by becoming a doctor. In another society, respect may come from being a successful hunter or farmer. Finally, Maslow did not actually believe that any given behavior is motivated by a single need. He contended that behavior is the result of multiple motivations. Sexual behavior, for example, may be motivated by the need for sexual release, by a need to win or express affection, by a sense of conquest or mastery, and or by a desire to feel feminine or masculine. You might conclude your discussion of Maslow's theory by noting that he described another set of human needs that does not appear in the hierarchy of the cognitive needs, or needs to know and to understand. These needs are expressed in the need to analyze or reduce things to their basic elements. The need to experiment to see what will happen if I do this, the need to explain, to construct a personal theory that will make sense of events of one's world. Maslow even suggested that these needs form their own smaller hierarchy. For example, the need to know is more important than the need to understand. The cognitive needs appear in life and are seen in a child's natural curiosity. Failure to meet those needs, because parents and schools sometimes teach a child to inhibit this spontaneous curiosity, can inhibit the development and full functioning of the individual. Okay, so now we're going to describe the physiological detriments of hunger. And although the stomach's pangs contribute to hunger, variations in body chemistry are more important. Increases in the hormone insulin diminish blood glucose, partly by converting it to body fat. We do not consciously feel this change in blood chemistry. Rather, our body's internal state is monitored by the hypothalamus, which regulates the body's weight, as it influences our feelings of hunger and satiety. Other hormones monitored by the hypothalamus include ghrelin, which is secreted by an empty stomach, leptin, secreted by fat cells, and PYY is a digestive tract hormone. Orexin is a hunger-triggering hormone secreted by the hypothalamus. The activity in the lateral hypothalamus, sides of the hypothalamus, brings on this hunger. Activity in the ventral medial hypothalamus, or the lower mid-hypothalamus, depresses hunger. Researchers have abandoned the idea that the body has a precise set point, a biologically fixed tendency to maintain optimum weight, preferring the term settling point to indicate the environmentally and biologically influenced level at which the weight settles, a response to caloric input and expenditure. Human bodies regulate weight through the control of food intake, energy output, and basal metabolic rate, the body's resting rate and energy expenditure. So stomach contractions and pangs send signals to the brain, making us aware of hunger. The stomach of rats was removed and connected to the esophagus to the small intestine, yet the rats still felt hungry and ate food. glucose level in the blood is maintained and insulin decreases glucose, and levels of glucose in the blood are monitored by receptors or neurons in the stomach, the liver, and the intestines. They send signals to the hypothalamus in the brain. The lateral hypothalamus brings on hunger stimulation and destroys the lateral hypothalamus, and the animal has no interest in eating. The reduction of blood glucose stimulates orexin, and the lateral hypothalamus leads rats to eat ravenously. The ventral medial hypothalamus depresses hunger and destroyed the ventral medial hypothalamus, and the animal will eat excessively, as this little snowball down here. So the hypothalamus and the hormones, orexin in the hypothalamus increases your hunger. Ghrelin is in the stomach and it increases your hunger. Insulin is in the pancreas and it too increases your hunger. Leptin is in your fat cells and decreases your hunger. And PPY is in the digestive tract and decreases your hunger. Manipulating the lateral and ventromedial hypothalamus alters the body's weight or thermostat. If weight is lost, food intake increases and energy expenditure decreases. If weight is gained, the opposite takes place. The psychology of hunger. Memory plays an important role in hunger due to the difficulties with retention. Amnesia patients eat frequently if given food. Taste preference in biology and culture, body chemistry, and environmental factors influence not only when we feel hunger, but what we feel hungry for. So part of knowing when to eat is our memory of our last meal. As times pass, we anticipate eating again and feel hungry. Although some taste preferences are genetic, conditioning and culture also affects taste. For example, Bedouins enjoy eating the eye of a camel, which most North Americans would find repulsive. Most North Americans also shun eating dogs, rats, and horse meat, all which are prized elsewhere. With repeat exposure, our appreciation for a new taste simply increases, and exposure to one set of novel foods increases willingness to try another. Some of our taste preferences, such as the avoidance of foods that have made us ill, have survival value. The text notes that our preferences for sweet, salty, and sweet, salty tastes are genetic and universal, while other tastes are conditioned. Taste preferences often seem arbitrary and irrational. Muslims and Jews don't eat pigs, Hindus don't eat cows, and Westerners are unlikely to eat bugs. Muslims and Jews consider the pig unclean, Hindus believe the cow is sacred, and Westerners are usually disgusted by the thought of eating an ant. Harris, an anthropologist at the University of Florida, argues that all taste preferences ultimately result from careful calculation of rewards and costs. Are discussed with ants and termites, for example, originated because gathering them was a waste of energy. Many other foods were more readily available and hence more easily acquired. Not so for certain Amazonian tribes who regard a stickful of crawling ants or termites to be a real delicacy. Cow protection was not always the central fact of Hinduism, writes Harris. In fact, in Vedic times, the Brahmin caste's religious duties centered not on protecting cows, but slaughtering them. With a population explosion in India, however, every square inch was needed to grow food, and cattle were needed to pull the plows. In short, it became more cost effective to keep them than it was to eat them. In condemning the pig as the dirtiest of animals, argues Harris, Jews and Muslims unexplained their most tolerant attitude toward other dung-eating domestic species, including chickens, goats, and dogs. And while undercooked pork can cause trichinosis, cattle, goats, and sheep transmit Berkeliosis and anthrax. The real problem was that pigs require shade, much water, and rich forest floor foodstuffs. In short, raising pigs was a waste of resources. Although a cow could be used to plow land, the pig had no alternative function which could redeem its existence. Thus, continues Harris, it became not only useless, but worse than useless, a pariah animal. At a February 1997 meeting of the American Association of the Advancement of Science, researchers studying people's food preferences reported finding a strong inherited tendency to like or reject a variety of foods, including those that are nutritionally best for us. Certain foods, such as broccoli, Brussels sprouts, and mustard greens, which are naturally bitter, may seem particularly so to some because of the taste genes they inherit. The researchers categorize people by the way they respond to the taste of the thyroid medicine called 6N polypropionical, or PROP. About 25% of the subjects cannot taste PROP at all and are categorized by non-tasters. Half find it mildly bitter and are considered to be tasters, and another 25% find it grossly bitter and are labeled super tasters. Women are more likely than men to be super tasters, and Asians and blacks are also more likely than whites to show the taste sensitivity. One implication of these research findings, argues nutritionist Valerie Duffy of the University of Connecticut, is that some people will never like or eat certain foods that are known to have cancer-fighting properties. It's not simply a matter of having inadequate information about good nutrition. Adam Drzejowski of the University of Michigan is beginning a study of women with breast cancer to see if there is a link between disease and inherited food preferences. Some researchers argue that at some point in human evolution, being a super taster may have improved chances of survival in the parts of the world where there were many poisonous plants, since these tend to taste bitter. On the other hand, being a non-taster could have been an advantage in safer environments. And some of the interesting findings are super tasters seem more sensitive to taste because they have more taste buds on their tongues. Super tasters are both more likely to find bitter foods nastily bitter and sweet foods to be excessively sweet. Dairy, fat tastes creamier, chili peppers are hotter, carbonated beverages seem unpleasantly bubbly. Super tasters find that saccharin has an unpleasant aftertaste. Non-tasters are likely to say it tastes fine. Super tasters are less likely to be overweight and appear to have better cholesterol. Furthermore, they seem to enjoy cooking more. Now we're going to talk about eating disorders. Anorexia nervosa and bulimia demonstrate the influence of psychological forces on physiological motivated behavior. Anorexia nervosa is an eating disorder in which normal weight person, usually an adolescent female, diets to become significantly 15% or more underweight, yet feels fat and obsessed with losing weight. Bulimia nervosa is an eating disorder characterized by private binge and purge episodes of overeating, usually of high caloric foods, followed by vomiting or laxative use and fasting or excessive exercise. In both disorders, challenging family settings and weight-obsessed pressures overwhelm the homeostatic drive to maintain a balanced internal state. Low self-esteem and negative emotions that interact with stressful life experience are additional contributing factors. Twin studies suggest that eating disorders may also have a genetic component. Obesity is a disorder characterized by being excessively overweight. Obesity increases the risk of health issues like cardiovascular disease. Whoops. Okay. Reasons for sexual disorders, sexual abuse, childhood sexual abuse is not a cause of eating disorder. Someone has an eating disorder, it does not mean they were sexually abused. Second characteristic is family. Younger generations develop eating disorders when raised in families in which weight is an excessive concern. So in a family where exercise and good health, healthy eating and all that is a um, major factor, then sometimes the children can take that to an extreme and misunderstand the message being delivered by the parents, and can also become a problem. Genetics, twin studies show that eating disorders are more likely to occur in identical twins rather than fraternal twins. Interestingly enough, body culture tends to place more emphasis on thin body image in comparison to other cultures. Uh, I find this chart particularly interesting because it shows what women's current body image is, uh, what men prefer, and then what women believe men prefer, and what women see as their ideal weight. So women actually see their ideal weight as being even thinner than what they think men prefer and what men actually prefer, and where they see themselves. So it's a quite fascinating comparison here. Um, so in summary, there is biological, psychological, and social cultural factors in eating behavior. Now we're going to move on to sexual motivation. Sexual motivation is nature's clever way of making people procreate, enabling our species to survive. Masters and Johnson, as you read in your case studies, will describe the human sexual response to consist of four phases. The excitement phase, in which genitals become engorged with blood. The vagina expands to secrete lubricant. The penis enlarges. The plateau phase, where excitement peaks, such as breathing, pulse, and blood pressure. The orgasm phase, in which contractions all over the body increase, breathing, pulse, pressure, and sexual release take place. And then finally, resolution, in which the engorged genital release blood. Male goes through a refractory phase, and women resolves slower. So the human sexual response cycle normally follows a pattern of excitement, plateau, and orgasm, which seems to involve similar feelings and brain activities in both males and females, and resolution, followed by the male's refractory period, during which the renowned arousal and orgasm are not possible. Sexual disorders are problems that consistently impair sexual functioning. Premature ejaculation, female orgasmic disorder are being successfully treated by new methods that assume that people learn and modify their sexual responses. Janet Hyde provides brief snapshots of three societies that vary in their patterns of sexual behavior. Innis Beig, a small island off the coast of Ireland, is the most naive and sexually repressive societies in the world. The islands abhor nudity, which adults washing only parts of their body that extend beyond their clothing. Even marital partners keep underclothes on during sexual activity. Premarital sex is essentially unknown, as is female orgasm. The husband invariably initiates sex Foreplay is limited to kissing through rough fondling of the buttocks, and the male on top position is the only position used. The male orgasm quickly and immediately falls. The male then quickly the male has an orgasm quickly and immediately falls asleep. Men believe that intercourse is hard on their health and will not engage in sex the night before an energy demanding task. Moreover, they do not approach their wives sexually during menstruation or for months after childbirth. The island women fear both menstruation and menopause. It is commonly believed that the latter can produce a mental disorder. Thus, some women have retired from life in their mid-40s, and few have even confined themselves to bed until death years later. Sex education is virtually non-existent. Parents merely trust that after marriage, nature will take its course. Mangaia, an island in the South Pacific, stands in sharp contrast to Inisbeag. Sex exists for both pleasure and procreation. It's a principal interest in an activity. The Mangaia boy hears of masturbation at about 7 and begins the practice at age 8 or 9. At age 13, he undergoes the super incision ritual. A slit is made in the top of the penis along its entire length, and the expert who performs the surgery gives him explicit sexual instruction. About 2 weeks after the operation, the boy has intercourse with an experienced woman who provides him with practice in various acts and positions. She specifically trains him in restraint so that he can have simultaneous orgasms with his partner. And the young girl receives similar expert instruction and will typically have 3 or 4 successive boyfriends between the ages of 13 and 20. Mangaian parents encourage their daughters to have sexual experience with several men so that they can find a marriage partner who is congenial. Boys aggressively seek out girls typically having coitus every night. The average boy may have 10 or more girlfriends before marriage. At around age 18, the Mangaians typically have sex most nights of the week with about 3 orgasms per night. All women apparently learn to experience orgasm. Bringing his partner to an orgasm is one of the man's primary sources of pleasure. While the people of Inisbeag seem to have little sex and plenty of anxiety, and those of Mangaia have plenty of sex and little anxiety, the citizens of Macanacu, a central Brazilian village, seem to have plenty of both. Sex is fascinating, the culture is highly eroticized, and there's openness with children about sexual matters. For example, children typically know that there's the names of their parents' many extramarital lovers. Men openly compete with each other for women's sexual favors, often bringing small gifts such as fish. At the same time, however, there is a high degree of gender segregation. If a woman enters a man's house and views what is forbidden, she may be taken to the woods and gang raped. In every other aspect, the culture is nonviolent. Women are believed to have much lower sex drive. There seems to be little recognition of female orgasm, and menstruation is understood to be dangerous. Dreams and fables speak to the culture of sexual anxiety. In myths, those who engage in extramarital sex typically die in fantastic ways. Although people seem to experience intense ambivalence and anxiety over sexuality, they continue their interest in vigorous pursuit of the activity. So, men generally suffer from 2 kinds of sexual problems: premature ejaculation and erectile disorder. Women tend to suffer from orgasmic disorders. These problems are not due to personality disorders and can be treated through behavior therapy and drugs such as Viagra. Sex hormones affect the development of sexual arousal. Characteristics, especially in animals, activate sexual behavior. The The sex hormones direct the physical and development of male and female sex characteristics, especially in non-human animals. They activate sexual behavior. Although testosterone and estrogen are present in both sexes, males have higher levels of testosterone and females higher levels of estrogen. In humans, the hormones influence sexual behaviors more loosely, especially when sufficient hormone levels are present in later life. As sex hormones decline and sexual fantasies and intercourse also declines. Levels of testosterone remain constant in males, so it's difficult to manipulate and activate sexual behavior. Castration, which reduces the testosterone levels, lowers sexual interest. Estrogen for female animals is often known as the period in which they are in heat. Expresses peak levels of estrogen. Female receptivity may be heightened with estrogen injections. Sex hormones may have a milder effects on humans than on animals. Women are more likely to have sex when close to ovulation, increased testosterone, and men show increased testosterone levels when socializing with women. Hunger responds to the need, the psychology of sex. Hunger responds to a need. If we do not need, we die. In that sense, sex is not a need because we do not have sex, we do not die. Many philosophical and religious adherents abstain from sex for extended periods of time, if not their entire lives. External stimuli such as sexually explicit materials can trigger arousal in both men and women, though the activated brain areas differ somewhat. Sexually coercive material tends to increase viewer acceptance of rape and violence toward women. Images of sexually attractive men and women may lead people to devalue their own partners and relationships. Our imaginations also influence sexual motivation. For example, in nearly all men, some 40% of women's dreams sometimes do not contain sexual imagery that leads to orgasm. Wide awake people become sexually aroused both by memories of prior sexual activities and by fantasies. About 95% of both men and women say that they've had sexual fantasies. Fantasizing about sex does not indicate a sexual problem or dissatisfaction. If anything, sexually active people have more sexual fantasies. Our imagination and our brain can influence sexual arousal and desire. People with spinal cord injuries and no genital sensation can still have sexual desire. Dreams and other forms of imagination are also associated with sexual arousal. Genital arousal is associated with all kinds of dreams. Nearly all men, 40% of women who dream of sexual imagery end up with an orgasm. When individuals reach adolescence, their sexual behavior develops. However, there are cultural differences. Sexual promiscuity in modern Western culture is greater than Arab countries and other Asian countries. Contraception, ignorance. Canadian teen girls do not have the right ideas about birth control methods. 2, guilt-related sexual activity. Guilt reduces sexual activity, but it also reduces the use of contraceptives. So making your children feel guilty about having sex will tend to prevent them from using contraceptives when they they give in to their temptation. Minimal communication. Many teenagers feel uncomfortable about discussing contraceptives, and so this is often a problem when you do not have sexual education. Alcohol use also is those who use alcohol prior to sex are less likely to use contraceptives. So this is why it's important when you find yourself in a position that this might occur, that you either you should abstain from using alcohol. Mass media, the media's portrayal of unsafe extramarital sex decreases the use of contraceptives. Um, and you see this a great deal on television today. Sexually transmitted infections. Um, Factors that reduce sexual activities in teens are high intelligence. Teens with higher intelligence are likely to delay their sexual activity. Religiosity. Religious teens and adults often reserve sex for their marital commitment. Having a father in the home can contribute to higher teen sexual activity. And learning programs, teens who volunteer and tutor in programs dedicated to reducing teen pregnancy are less likely to engage in unsafe sex. So the increase of premarital sexual activity among American teenagers has led to an increase of adolescent pregnancy rate. Although contraceptives are a sure strategy for preventing pregnancy, only 1/3 of sexually active male teens use condoms consistently. Reasons for this failure to include ignorance of which birth control methods will protect them and the tendency to overestimate the sexual activity of their friends. Guilt related to sexual activity sometimes results in a lack of planned birth control. When passion overwhelms intentions, the result may be conception. Often there is a minimal communication about birth control, as many teenagers are uncomfortable discussing contraception with parents or partners. Sexually active teens also use alcohol, which can break down their normal restraints. Finally, television movies foster sexual norms of unprotected promiscuity. Unprotected sex has also led to increased rates of sexually transmitted infections. Uh, Sexually transmitted infections such as human papillomavirus and AIDS. Teenage girls, because of their less mature biological development and lower levels of protective antibodies, seem especially vulnerable to STIs. Attempts to protect teens through comprehensive sex education programs include greater emphasis on teen abstinence. Teens with high rather than average intelligence more often delay sex. Religiosity is the father's presence and participation in in-service learning programs are also predictors of sexual restraint. Physiological causes include both of sexual disorders, um, include both organic factors and drugs. For example, there is a connection between diabetes mellitus and erectile disorder, although the exact mechanism has not been identified. Also, diseases of the heart and circulatory system are particularly likely to be associated with erectile disorder. A man who has a circulatory disorder that causes an erection problems may develop anxieties over his sexual performance, which in turn compounds problems. This illustrates the complex interplay between physical and psychological causes. Drugs may have side effects that cause sexual dysfunction. People who have problems with alcoholism, particularly in the later stages, may experience erectile disorder, orgasmic disorder, and a loss of desire. The opiates or narcotics, such as morphine and heroin, also have strong suppression effects on sexual desire and response. Sometimes prescription drugs, for example, certain antidepressants are associated with both arousal and orgasm, problems in both men and women. Psychological causes can be characterized by immediate causes of those that are a result of prior learning. Immediate causes include anxiety, such as fear of failure. Anxiety leads to self-fulfilling prophecy, in which the fear of failure itself produces the failure that leads to greater fear that results yet another failure. Cognitive interference, or what Masters and Johnson's called spectatoring, is another immediate cause of sexual disorder. This person is distracted from erotic experience itself, steps outside the sexual act to evaluate how he or she is doing. People may ask whether their technique is good enough or wonder whether their partner is finding their body attractive. Failure to communicate is a third immediate cause of sexual disorder. Many people do not verbalize their sexual desires. A woman who needs a great deal of clitoral stimulation may never tell their partner and as a result fails to experience orgasm. Finally, Hyde and DeLavater identify the failure to engage in effective sexually stimulating behavior as a fourth immediate cause of a sexual disorder. For example, a couple may seek therapy because of the wife's failure to experience orgasm. The therapist may learn that neither partner is aware of the location of the clitoris, much less of its erotic potential. Prior learning may also contribute to sexual disorder. The person's first sexual act may have been traumatic. Childhood sexual abuse is perhaps the most serious early experience that leads to a later disorder. Having been taught that sex is dirty or that masturbation is sinful are also factors that produce sexual difficulties in adulthood. Then finally, we have interpersonal causes and disturbances in a couple's relationship that produce disorder. Anger, resentment, or conflict over power may lead to sexual difficulties for couples. Sex may be used as a weapon to punish one's husband or wife. Fear of intimacy may also produce disorder. This fear demonstrates the complex interplay between the psychological and interpersonal causes. It may be the product of a disappointing interpersonal relationship with parents in early childhood. Fear leads to a person's drawback from sexual relationship before it becomes truly fulfilling. Sexual orientation refers to a person's preference for emotional and sexual relationships with individuals of the same sex, other sex, or either sex. Orientation is a homosexual. So we're going to summarize current views of the number of people whose sexual orientation is homosexual and discuss the research on environmental biological influences on sexual orientation. Sexual orientation is an enduring sexual attraction towards members of either or their own sex. If you're attracted to your own sex, you're known as a homosexual. If you're attracted to the other sex, you are known as a heterosexual. Studies in both Europe and the United States suggest about 3 or 4% of men and 1 or 2% of women are exclusively homosexual. Estimates derived from the sex of unmarried partners reported in 2000 United States Census suggest that 2.5% of the population is gay or lesbian. Such studies also tell us that sexual orientation is an enduring factor. Although we are still unsure why one person becomes homosexual and another heterosexual, it is beginning to look as though there's biological factors involved. No links have been found between homosexuality and a child's relationship with their parents, whether the father is absent from the home or not. Fear or hatred of people of other gender, childhood sexual experience, peer relationships, or dating experience. On the other hand, biological influences are evident in studies of same-sex relationships in several hundred species, straight, gay, differences in body-brain characteristics, genetic studies of family members and twins, and the effect of exposure to certain hormones during critical periods of prenatal development may also be factors. Homosexuality is more likely based on biological factors like differing brain centers and genetics and prenatal hormone exposure rather than environmental factors. A number of animal species are devoted to the same-sex partners, suggesting that homosexuality exists in the animal world. In a homosexual men, the size of the anterior hypothalamus is smaller and the anterior commissure is larger, indicating there may be a biological factor there. Although research on sexual motivation does not attempt to define a personal meaning, a number of reasons suggest that homosexuality may be due to genetic factors. Homosexuality seems to run in families. Twin studies show that homosexuality is more common in identical twins than fraternal twins. However, there are mixed results. Fruit flies, genetic engineers can genetically manipulate females to act like males during courtship and males to act like females. Hormones and sexual orientation. Prenatal hormones affect sexual orientation. In animals, the exposure of fetus to testosterone results in females exhibiting homosexual behavior. Humans' exposure of a male or female fetus to female hormones results in attraction to males. Although research on sexual motivation does not attempt to define the personal meaning of sex in our lives, sex research and education are not value-free. Research values should be stated openly, enabling us to debate them to reflect our own values. Sex at its human best is life uniting and love renewing. So attitudes are changing regarding homosexuality, and it's much more accepted now than it was 30 years ago. Sex and human values. Promiscuous recreational sex poses certain psychological and social health and moral problems that must be faced realistically. Social bonds boosted our ancestors' survival rate. Adults who formed attachments were more likely to come together to reproduce and stay together to nurture their offspring to maturity. Cooperation in groups also enhance survival. When relationships form, we often feel joy. Most people mention, before anything else, close relationships as making life meaningful. Even our self-esteem is a gauge of how valued and accepted we feel. Attachments can keep people in abusive relationships, as fear of being alone may seem worse than the pain of emotional physical abuse. When something threatens our social ties and negative emotions and overwhelms us, when ostracized people may engage in self-defeating antisocial behaviors. Finally, social relationships enhance health. Because everyone has at one time or another experienced the pain of being excluded, you may want William and Zardo report on the use of both experiments and interviews to study the causes and consequences of complexities of ostracism. Williams' model states that ostracism quickly threatens four fundamental needs: belonging, self-esteem, control, and meaningful existence. For example, female participants regain their group acceptance. Being ostracized by friends rather than by strangers may be even more painful. Females who were excluded by friends later demonstrated a greater need for control than those who were excluded by strangers. Research participants who merely role play still show the psychological impact of being excluded. In the train ride paradigm, 3 participants sit in a row with a target in the middle seat. The laboratory room itself is designed to look like the carriage of a train. with several rows of chairs and train signs posted on the walls. All participants are given scenarios that describe how the sources are to ostracize the target. As the train ride begins, all participants assume their role with enthusiasm. Energy and noise levels are high. The researchers report, however, that as the targets begin to perceive their attempts to join the conversation are unsuccessful, they typically begin to grow quieter. Their comments become less frequent, and their attempts to engage in the sources nonverbally are curtailed to the point where, after 2 minutes of ostracism, they remain seated with arms folded, staring off in the distance, utterly silent as noise and laughter continue around them. Emotional reactions were sometimes so strong that even sources apologized to targets on the following day. Particularly poignant are the self-report narrative accounts of experience with ostracism. Williams and Zardo give the instance of following letter sent to them by a young woman in their high school. In high school, other students thought me weird and never spoke to me. I tell you all in honesty that at one stage they refused to speak to me for 153 days. Not one word at all. That was a very low point of my life, and on the 153rd day I swallowed 29 Valium pills. My brother found me and called an ambulance. When I returned to school, the kids had heard the whole story, and for a few days they were falling all over themselves to be my friend. Sadly, it didn't last. They stopped talking to me again, and I was devastated, and I stopped talking myself then, and I figured that it was useless to have a voice if no one listened. One male source of ostracism wrote that at present my sister, age 58 in the United States, won't talk to either my father or myself for supposedly differing reasons. My father's sister has not spoken to him for over 30 years. My mother's brother once refused to talk to his wife for 6 months. My mother regularly refused to talk to me or my sister for days at a time. It seems like ostracism is a congenital condition in my family. In a structured interview, a 40-year-old female recounted the following experience. My father has given me a silent treatment whenever he's been upset with me since I was 12 years old. Now I'm 40 and my father hasn't talked to me in 6 months. Recently he was hospitalized and I was told he might die. I decided to go see him, and even if he wasn't talking to me, walked up to him, held his hand and said, "Oh, Daddy, please don't leave me," and he looked at his eyes were welled up with tears and then turned his head away from me. He still wouldn't talk to me. His death would be final silence. Finally, the following experience of a father who chose to give his son the silent treatment after a particularly heated argument highlights the difficulty of once again initiating conversation. After 2 weeks, I woke up one morning with a blinding flash of insight. What are you doing to your relationship with your son? In that short period of time, my son had already become intimidated by this treatment. He did exactly what his mother said at all times, and whenever he spoke, it was in a quiet whisper. I'm ashamed to say that I was sort of pleased with the effects of my ostracism, but as I say, one day I realized that it was making him weak and submissive, and that it was eroding the future and quality of our relationship. To terminate ostracism, however, was an extremely difficult process. I can only begin with grudging monosyllabic responses to his indirect overtures. I was only able to expand these responses with the passing of time. It's only now, about 6 weeks since the ostracism ceased, that our relationship appears to be getting back to pre-row normality. If it had lasted much longer, I might not have been able to stop, and then that not only would only our relationship have been destroyed, but also my son himself might have been permanently emotionally and physiologically disfigured. Further, it may have led to illness and perhaps ultimately to his premature death. Ostracism can be like a whirlwind or quicksand. If the user don't extract yourself from it as soon as possible, it is likely to become impossible to terminate of the emergence and the subsequent will to do so. So belongingness is the wanting to belong, the need to belong. Colors our thinking and emotions. Social acceptance and sense of belonging with others increase our self-esteem. Social segregation decreases it. maintaining relationships. We resist breaking social bonds, even bad ones. Ostracism is a social exclusion, leads to demoralization, depression, and at times nasty behavior, as we saw in the example I just told you about. And fortifying health, people who tend to have close friends are happier and healthier. Flow is the experience between no work and a lot of work. Flow marks the immersion into one's work. People who flow in their work are driven less by extrinsic rewards and are more by intrinsic rewards. Work helps Work helps satisfy several levels of need identified in Maslow's hierarchy. Work supports us, connects us to others, and helps define us. When work fully engages our skills, we experience flow. We are completely involved and have diminished awareness of self and time. Flow experiences boost of our self-esteem, our confidence, and our well-being. Motivation and work. The healthy life, said Sigmund Freud, is filled by love and work. In his recent book, Good Business Leadership, Flow and Making the Meaning, Mihai Csikszentmihalyi reports that his studies of visionary leaders highlight three principles as fundamental in running a profitable organization that also contributes to human happiness. The principle involves having a vision beyond the self. The most effective leaders have a sense of calling to do their best, to help people, and to build a better world. Visionary leaders believe in a goal that benefits not only themselves but others as well. Csikszentmihalyi calls it soul, because truly acquires such soul when leaders make global responsibility and calling a better world a strategic goal of their organization. They themselves practice and communicate to others a sense of responsibility that reaches out to the community in which they work, to democracy as the best upholder of civic institutions, and to the environment that allows us to survive and prosper. Vision alone is not enough, argues Csikszentmihalyi. He has to be translated into operating principles of organization. The most important principle is trust, which is brought by respect. Workers place themselves in the service of leaders' vision. If they feel that the rules of the organization are fairly applied, their contributions are recognized, and that their integrity is respected. An organization that hopes to do good business must also be concerned with personal growth of its members. It provides opportunities for flow in the workplace. And finally, the specific product is crucial. Does the product or service make people happier in the long run as well as in the present? Or is it something we eventually regret when we ever introduced? There are often no simple answers. Yet there are some obvious examples. Given the evidence regarding the dangers of smoking, big tobacco is simply not good business. At the other end of the continuum, a company that made artificial lungs to alleviate the suffering of patients with respiratory disease. Strangely, company employees had not given much thought to the consequences of what they were doing until families began to bring in their children who for the first time could breathe freely. The workers were energized by the concrete evidence that their work actually improved people's lives. Firms that use a portion of their profits by giving to philanthropies also implement this third important principle. So we're going to identify the three subfields of industrial organizational psychology. So people have different attitudes towards work. Some take it as a job, a necessary way to make money, a career, an opportunity to advance from one position to another, and some make it a calling, a socially useful activity such as teaching. In industrial countries, work and satisfaction often go hand in hand. White-collar workers report that they are much more satisfied with their work, but manual workers also report work satisfaction, where the unemployed, of course, do not report much work satisfaction at all. Industrial organizational psychology applies psychological principles to the workplace. You have personnel psychology studies the principles of selecting and evaluating workers. These people are often found in what they call HR, or human resources. Organizational psychology studies how work environments and management styles influence worker motivation, satisfaction, and productivity. Industrial organizational aims to apply psychology's principles to the workplace through its primary subfields of personnel psychology, or organizational psychology, and human factors psychology. Personnel psychology applies the disciplines, methods, and principles to selecting and evaluating workers. Organizational psychology considers how work environments and management styles influence worker motivation, satisfaction, and productivity. Human factors psychology that we discussed in Chapter 6 also explores how machines and environments can be optimally designed to fit human abilities. Personnel psychology. A personnel psychologist assists organizations at various stages of selecting and assessing employees, and oftentimes these are people found in human resources. Personnel psychologists aim to identify people's strengths, match them to the specific organizational tasks. They use various tools to assess applicants and decide who is best suited to do the job. Unstructured interviews frequently foster illusory overconfidence in one's ability to predict employee success. Structured interviews offer a disciplined method of collecting information. They pinpoint job-relevant strengths and enhance interview reliability and validity. Performance appraisals include checklists, graphic rating scales, and behavior rating scales. Some firms practice 360-degree feedback in which everyone rates everyone else. They help managers decide which employees to retain and how to appropriately reward and pay people, and how to better harness their strengths. Job appraisals can also serve to affirm workers' strengths and motivate needed improvements. Performance appraisal, like all other social judgments, is vulnerable to bias and subject error. For example, the halo effect. For example, the halo error, leniency and severity errors, and recency errors. Interviewers often overrate their discernment. Intention versus habits. Intentions matter, but long-lasting habits matter even more. Successful employees, interviewers are more likely to talk about those employees that are turned out to be successful. Presumption about candidates. Interviewers presume wrongly that what we see is what we get, and preconceptions and interviewers' prior knowledge about a candidate may affect their judgment. The structured interview is a formal, disciplined way of gathering information from the interviewee. Structured interviews pinpoint strengths, attitudes, behaviors, knowledge, and skills. The personnel psychologist may do the following: analyze the job, have a script of questions, and train the interviewer. So personnel psychologists have a variety of different tasks involved in the selecting of employees. They also need to appraise the performance and results in two things: employee retention and the encouragement of better performance. Achievement motivation is the desire for significant accomplishments, for mastering skills or ideals, for control, and for rapidly attaining a high standard. Those who achieve the most distinguish not so much by natural ability as by hard work and daily discipline. Organizations turn to the industrial organizational psychologist to help motivate employees and foster employee satisfaction, because research shows that the most productive and engaged workers are those working in satisfying environments. Engaged workers know what's expected of them, feel fulfilled in their work, and perceive that they are part of something significant. Worker satisfaction and engagement are associated with lower absenteeism, higher productivity, and greater profits. Achievement motivation is defined as a desire for significant accomplishment. Skinner devised a daily discipline schedule that led him to become the 20th century's most influential psychologist. Satisfaction and engagement. If you want your employees to be engaged and satisfied, they must know what's expected of them. They must feel the need to work. They must feel fulfilled by the work that they do. They must have opportunities to do their best. The employee must think of himself to be part of something significant, and he has opportunities to, or he or she has opportunities to learn and develop and improve as an employee. Engaged workers are more productive than non-engaged workers. Every leader dreams of managing in ways that enhance people's satisfaction, engagement, and productivity in his or her organization. Effective leaders need to select the right people, determine their employees' talents, adjust their work roles to their talents, and develop their talent strength. Effective managers harness job-relevant strengths, set goals, choose opportunity for leadership style. They discern their employees' natural talents. They adjust their work roles to those talents. They give people the freedom to do what they do best. They care about the people. They feel their work reinforce positive behaviors through recognition and reward. To foster productivity, managers work with people to define explicit goals, elicit comments or commitments to implementation plans, and provide feedback on progress. Some managers excel at task leadership, setting standards and organizing work, and focusing attention on goals. They keep a group centered on its mission. Task leaders typically have a directive style which can work well as if they are bright enough to give good orders. Others excel at social leadership, mediating conflicts and building high-achieving teams. Social leaders often delegate authority and welcome the participation of team members. Leadership style should be appropriate for the people and goals involved. The best leaders exude charisma and inspire their workers. This is referred to as transformational leadership. Some research suggests that the effective managers exhibit a high degree of both task and social leadership. Specific challenging goals motivate people to reach higher achievement levels, especially their feedback, such as progress reports. Different organizational demands need different kinds of leaders. Leadership varies from a boss-focused style to democratic style. Task leadership involves setting standards, organizing work, and focusing on goals. And this is more of a military-style organization, where social leadership involves mediating conflicts, building high-achieving teams. Dean Key Simonton suggests that America's most successful presidents use language rich in imagery. They made an emotional connection with people by talking to the gut rather than the brain. People don't have rich associations with abstract words like inference, concept, or logic. He suggests, I feel your pain has association, but I can relate to your viewpoint doesn't. Sometimes situations draw out a person's hidden charisma. Simonton contrasts President Bush's frequent malapropisms when first taking office with his vivid emotional imagery after 9/11. Both Simonton and Reggio believe that the situation, even training, can help bring out a person's charisma. At the same time, training cannot help people with no charisma potential, Reggio suggests. Nothing can turn Al Gore into Bill Clinton. Stefani Georges has identified yet another important factor in charisma. She found that people rated leaders as charismatic only if they believed that the leaders sacrificed their own interests for a cause. Chrysler head Lee Iacocca provided an important example. He rejuvenated the company in the 1980s while giving himself a $1 annual salary. His employees found this important action to be austere, genuine, and charismatic. Yorgis argues that charismatic leaders also consider others' emotional well-being and that they empower followers in goal setting. Their goal is to create followers who will eventually lead themselves. Much research indicates that charismatic people do show a strong emotional and social intelligence. Research indicates that finally that physical appearance and nonverbal behavior play a role. Frank Barini found that people subconsciously switch their postures to match that of someone they are talking to. He maintains this ability to connect with others on a grand scale, as when people line dance and do the wave of a football game, is an important key to charisma. Mass synchrony creates a positive, enjoyable experience. When the kind of synchrony occurs with a single person, you think they are charismatic. Research indicates that the high rapport interactions have synchrony expressivity. Yet, argues Barini, more is needed. It's all about timing, repetition, and rhythmic cadence, raising amplitude at key points. This is a craft, and you have to play the crowd like an improvisational jazz. The charismatic individual knows the gestures but has the innate ability to play any given guidance. He suggests that in timing of their breaths, gestures, and cadence of their speech, some people can enwrap listeners into synchrony where they breathe and sway in tune with the speaker. This concludes our chapter on motivation and work. I hope you enjoyed it.